Over 6.1 million people have fled Venezuela, creating the largest migration crisis in Latin American history. Once the richest nation in the region, with vast oil reserves fueling its wealth, Venezuela now faces hyperinflation, food shortages, and political oppression. Entire families are walking across borders to survive. This is the story of a nation's unraveling. It's difficult to fathom that Venezuela, now associated with hyperinflation, hunger, and authoritarian rule, was once a thriving democracy admired worldwide. Its cities, such as Caracas, buzzed with energy, modern infrastructure, and a vibrant culture that reflected the nation's prosperity. Even more strikingly, Venezuela wasn't just rich. It was one of the wealthiest countries in Latin America, built on its massive reserves of crude oil. The rise and fall of this once thriving nation, however, is a story of decisions made at the highest levels of power, decisions that transformed the wealth of an entire country into ashes. But before unraveling how Venezuela fell apart, let's take a look at what the collapse meant for the millions forced to flee their homeland. Imagine walking through scorching heat or freezing mountain passes, clutching your child's hand, unsure where the next meal will come from. Imagine sleeping on the roadside under a makeshift shelter. For many Venezuelans, this isn't a worst-case scenario. It's the price they must pay to escape the unbearable conditions back home. Since 2015, more than 6.1 million Venezuelans have fled the country. And while some cross borders on foot, others embark on perilous sea journeys to neighboring Caribbean islands, risking their lives in overcrowded boats. Thousands leave without a clear destination in mind, hoping to reach safety, stability, and opportunity wherever they can find it. But even for those who escape, life is often far from easy. Crossing borders without documents makes many migrants vulnerable to exploitation by smugglers and traffickers. And yet, they keep moving, propelled by the hope of something better, because staying behind means enduring unimaginable hardships. What forced so many Venezuelans to flee in the first place? To understand, we need to go back to the root of the crisis, an economy that was both Venezuela's greatest strength and its fatal flaw. Venezuela's oil reserves were its crown jewel, fueling the nation's economy and international prestige. Under Hugo Chávez's presidency in the early 2000s, the country's oil wealth was used to fund ambitious social programs. Chávez was beloved by many, especially the poor, for his efforts to reduce poverty and provide free healthcare and education. He became the champion of Venezuela's underprivileged, building a narrative of hope and empowerment. But there was a darker side to this economic boom that few were willing to acknowledge. Chávez's government had tied the nation's economy almost entirely to oil exports. While the money flowed in, everything seemed fine. But what if oil prices dropped? That looming question became a grim reality in 2014, just a year after Chávez's successor, Nicolas Maduro, took office. Oil prices collapsed, and with them, the foundation of Venezuela's economy. The dream Chávez had built began to unravel, leaving Maduro with an economic disaster that would spiral out of control. Maduro, instead of finding solutions, made decisions that deepened the crisis. Venezuela became the poster child for hyperinflation, with prices skyrocketing to unimaginable levels. By 2020, the inflation rate surpassed 2,000%. The bolivar, once a stable currency, became practically worthless. Picture this: a loaf of bread costing millions of bolivars, or a monthly salary barely enough to buy a carton of eggs. For ordinary Venezuelans, life turned into a daily struggle for survival. Food shortages became so severe that people turned to black markets, where prices were even higher. Families would wait in endless lines outside grocery stores, hoping to purchase whatever scraps remained, only to return home empty-handed. Meanwhile, medicine disappeared from pharmacies, and hospitals crumbled under the weight of the crisis. Patients were often left untreated, as doctors worked without proper tools or medication, and power outages plunged operating rooms into darkness. Even those with money could barely find the essentials to survive. It was a collapse that left no corner of Venezuelan society untouched. Venezuela's political system was equally shattered. After Maduro took office in 2013, he quickly consolidated power, eliminating any opposition that could threaten his rule. In 2015, when a coalition of opposition parties won a majority in the National Assembly, it seemed like a turning point. But Maduro acted swiftly, stacking the Supreme Court with loyalists who stripped the assembly of its powers. Massive protests erupted as people demanded change, but the government's response was brutal. Security forces cracked down violently, leaving hundreds dead and thousands injured. Journalists were arrested, media outlets were censored, and opposition leaders were either exiled or imprisoned, creating a chilling atmosphere of fear. Even international condemnation and sanctions failed to deter Maduro from tightening his grip on power. What does it mean for a country when its people's voices are silenced and even hope feels like a distant memory? One of the most dramatic power grabs came in 2017 when Maduro created a new governing body, the National Constituent Assembly, filled with his supporters. This assembly effectively replaced the opposition-led National Assembly, giving Maduro unprecedented control over the country. International observers and governments around the world condemned the move, calling it a step toward authoritarian rule. But despite sanctions and widespread criticism, Maduro held firm, tightening his grip on power. And so, millions of Venezuelans made the heartbreaking decision to leave their homeland. Colombia became the primary destination, hosting over 2.4 million Venezuelans. Peru welcomed more than 1.5 million. These countries opened their borders, offering healthcare, education, and work opportunities to migrants. But the sheer scale of the exodus, described as the largest displacement crisis in Latin America's modern history, has strained resources in host nations. Local communities often face challenges in providing enough housing, schools, and healthcare facilities to accommodate the influx. Tensions have occasionally flared as residents feel overwhelmed by the sudden population surge, though many continue to show compassion. How long can these host nations sustain their generosity, and what happens to those who are turned away? In many ways, the journey out of Venezuela is as harrowing as the conditions within it. Families trek through dangerous mountain passes and dense jungles, often with no clear destination. Others attempt maritime routes, braving treacherous waters to reach the Caribbean. These migrants face enormous risks, from exhaustion and starvation to exploitation by traffickers. And yet, despite the dangers, the flow of people continues. It's a testament to the desperation they feel, the belief that even the most uncertain future is better than staying behind. Venezuelans abroad are creating communities, supporting one another, and sending remittances back home to help those left behind. Activists continue to protest Maduro's regime, even in the face of brutal crackdowns. And the international community continues to search for solutions, though the path forward remains uncertain. So, where does Venezuela go from here? Is there hope for a nation that has endured so much? The answer may lie with the millions who have left their homeland. These migrants, forced to start over in foreign lands, carry with them the potential to rebuild both their own lives and one day, their nation. The crisis in Venezuela is a stark reminder of how political decisions can shape the fate of millions. It's a story of loss and resilience, despair and hope, all unfolding before the eyes of the world. If this story resonated with you, every action counts, no matter how small. And if you want to stay informed about the stories shaping our world, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.